joining us. We will start our program shortly. Stay connected with UEO by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at AKA_UEO. For more information of UEO's upcoming programs, please visit us at www.aka-upsilon-epsilon-omega.org. Thank you for joining us for Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Upsilon Epsilon Omega chapters, celebrating the legacy of Black business in Maryland, spotlighting the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum, located in Baltimore, Maryland. Before we begin, a quick word from Chapter President Kendra Brown.
Kendra Brown, and I'm the president of the Upsilon Epsilon Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to our series celebrating the legacy of Black business in Maryland, which falls within Target 3, Building Your Economic Legacy, under our international program, Exemplifying Excellence Through Sustainable Service. Under this target, our sorority has emphasized financial planning, asset accumulation, and wealth building, including savings and investments, managing debt, and improving credit. Additionally, through our entrepreneurship in the Black Dollar 365 focus, we highlight and promote successful African-American owned businesses with an aim towards spawning new entrepreneurial ventures in our communities by encouraging intentional support and leveraging the power of the Black Dollar 365 days a year. The first highlight of our chapter series is the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum. Now you will hear from Lauren Jones, a member of Upsilon Epsilon Omega chapter, who is the Target 3 lead.
Thank you, Ms. Kendra Brown, for the welcome. As Ms. Brown explained, one of the target areas in which our programming focuses is on building your economic legacy. Tonight, we are focusing on supporting Black businesses as a part of building our economic legacy within our communities. As the official Black History Month came to a close with February, and as we embark on the celebration of Women's History Month, for many of us, Black history and women's history are celebrations that continue 365 days a year. Tonight, we are focusing a Black business spotlight on one of the treasures of Baltimore, a treasure of the state of Maryland, and a national treasure. We have the pleasure of talking with one of the co-founders of the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum, located here in Baltimore. There is nothing like it anywhere. The National Great Blacks in Wax Museum offers a unique view of African American history featuring historical and present day figures and role models that represent and pay homage to the greatness of their legacy and impact on history and culture locally, in Maryland, in America, and the world. As a native of Baltimore, I am honored to have the privilege to introduce the some and welcome to others one of Charm City's phenomenal business owners and a co-founder of the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum, Dr. Joanne Martin. Dr. Martin, thank you so much for taking time out to join us this evening and to share the vision, history, and impact of the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum. Dr. Martin, thank you. I've had the pleasure of visiting the museum on several occasions. When you enter into the museum, you are immediately immersed in history. Tell us what sparked your husband and your interest in creating a wax museum focusing on African American history.
Well, my husband Elmer and I were concerned that um, as we worked with youth, one incident that really sparked what we do was of a young kid playing on a little league baseball team that my husband Elmer sponsored, that my husband organized. And he had ID pictures taken of the kids so that they could play in the league. A photographer came to where they were getting ready to practice, handed out the photos. And the kid came to Elmer very upset and angry and demanded that he make the photographer take the picture over. And so Elmer said he looked at it, son, it's a great picture of you. Why do you want him to take it over? And the kid said, because they got me too black in this picture.
Whoa.
I don't want to be as black as they got me in this picture. And we were the generation that decided that we were black and not Negro or colored. We were that was our generation. We were the generation that said, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, and black is beautiful, and embrace your blackness and all of those things. And so the idea that we thought that we had gotten past this notion of being too black, and that this kid is saying, I don't want to be as black as they got me in this picture. So Elmer said he sat in his office thinking about how did we get back to this point, and that he finally concluded that we failed to institutionalize our history, to build institutions designed solely for the purpose of preserving our history and culture, and failing that, every generation was going to have to start from scratch. And so we had visited a wax museum in St. Augustine because I'm from Florida. His grandmother was visiting with us. And we were fascinated. His grandmother was bored to tears, but we were fascinated by that. There weren't any black figures there. And the ones that they had were just all shiny black and sweating and looking as if they were working in the fields. And Elma knew, and I knew that they didn't capture this variety of from the very darkest to the very lightest and everything in between. That's who we are. So, but the notion of those wax figures and the power of them to put a face on history is what fascinated us.
The museum's story began as a traveling exhibit. Tell us a little bit about how you started with just a few wax figures and the traveling exhibit experience and how that impacted you.
Well, once Elmer and I decided that we wanted to just step into the ring of a wax figure museum, then we were able to purchase four, and we were operating with almost no money. But we purchased four wax figures, and we would put them into my Pontiac and travel to schools and churches. And our first major exhibit was at Mondawmin Mall for the Martin Luther King holiday before it became a federal holiday. And then we put the figures back into my Pontiac and drive them home to our two-bedroom apartment. And I never know what word to use. Like live doesn't work. Resided, occupied the guest bedroom of our two-bedroom apartment, and that was our very humble beginning.
And what was the response to people seeing those during your traveling exhibits?
And that really was one of the things that we wanted to test. And we Lexington Market we have a long history with Lexington Market, but it was one of the places where they invited us to come in and do an exhibit. And um, we found when we pack our figures back up that people had put money into the lap of Mary McLeod Bethune because she was one of our first four, and so we and then we started getting invitations to exhibit at the AFRAM.
Mhm.
And schools at Morgan State University, a lot of churches. We went to one church, and the minister, he wanted us. We put the figures in a pew, and he said, "We're glad to have the Great Blacks in Wax Museum here today." And in fact, they brought one of their people with them, and and she might be sitting next to one of you. And one of the congregants uh, yelled, "Oh my goodness!" And she said, "I've been talking to this lady. I thought she was so rude because she wouldn't talk back to me." And so just things like that. But we began to attract attention
Mhm.
and have people want us to come in and do an exhibit.
Now, the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum is in itself history. It's the first in its uniqueness in that it's the first museum of wax in Baltimore, and it's the first wax museum of African American history in the country. What was your goal when you decided to create this museum? What did you hope to accomplish by creating it?
Well, Elmer said that you could put a wax figure across a room and people are going to naturally gravitate toward it. And the minute they ask the question, who is that, or even what is that, you're in a position to teach. And for me, the idea that, as I think I said earlier, that those wax figures put a face on history, a history that has been largely faceless. I grew up in a small school in Florida, Yulee, Florida, and on the wall there were three pictures. One of Mary McLeod Bethune that every Floridian that child had to know because she founded a school there and she was from there. Well, she founded a school there, and George Washington Carver because you had to know him. And the third picture was of what in my 8-year-old mind was Mr. Costin, the bus driver. It never occurred to me that there might not be a logical reason for Mr. Costin to be on a wall with Mary McLeod Bethune and George Washington Carver. But at 8 years old, that's who I thought it was. It was with the museum that I realized that that was Booker T. Washington. And as Booker T. Washington was probably the most powerful black man of his time. And for me to grow up not even knowing what he looked like until the museum and that face that was suddenly there and I could connect it. And I went to Mr. Costin once and visited him, took him a brochure that where we had Booker T. Washington on the cover. And he said, Abby dog, that do look like me. And, but just that, putting a face on our history.
Now, when you initially started the museum, it was on Saratoga Street in Baltimore. And then it expanded to the North Avenue site it's currently located. What made you decide to move to the east side of Baltimore? I know during that time, downtown was expanding, especially with the Inner Harbor. And so the tourist attraction, of course, was downtown at the Inner Harbor. But what spurred you to go to and I'm from the east side, so I'm glad it's on the east side. So what spurred you to go to the east side?
Again, Elmer, and so much of what he was our visionary, and so much of his thinking being a part of the Black consciousness, Black power movement and era. Elmer said that conventional wisdom all over this nation is that you hide your poverty areas, and once you succeed in hiding them, then you could succeed in neglecting them. But that we were going to create a museum so powerful right in the heart of the African American community so that we could show that community development and cultural development go hand in hand. And the idea that we could show that tourism can thrive in our community away from the inner harbor, and that everything doesn't have to be concentrated on the water, and that we could bring businesses to that area and with the tourists that we were attracting. That was the thinking.
The museum has grown from the 4 to 5 traveling wax figures to more than 100 tributes to greatness in the legacy of African American history. What do you believe is the catalyst for the growth and expansion of the museum?
uh, One of the things is that we have not been afraid to talk about all of the struggle that we have had to undergo. Some people of the idea that we have a permanent exhibit on lynching. Museums, Elmer always said that museums aren't going to want to touch that subject, or when they do it as a temporary exhibit, pat themselves on the back, fill it with so much abstractions that you don't know that you're looking at something very heinous and brutal and evil. And that if we're going to talk about the yardsticks by which we measure the struggle and the achievements, you have to be willing to talk about lynching as one of those. You have to be able to talk about the slave ship experience as one of those, and not to hide the slaves, pretend that the slave ship exhibit was a Tom Joyner morning cruise or the good ship Lollipop. That you have to show that as a people, we have just the fact that I'm here and you're here means something about the strength of the people who had to endure that. And that if we weren't going to be true to that and tell it in its raw reality, then it would that then don't touch that as a subject, because you do a disjustice and a disrespect to your ancestors who made it possible for us to be here.
How are the wax figures selected for the museum? Because you have the full gamut of different historical as well as present day figures. So how are they selected?
Well, we look at first those figures that you would expect to be in a museum about African American history. So that's number one. But you're also looking for those little known, often neglected figures of history. Those people who had an impact, but whose story is not known. And then to look at what we describe as and define as those traditions, the protest tradition, the education tradition, the religious tradition, the helping tradition. So figures that fit into those categories as well.
What is the process for the actual creation of the wax figures? And do you have a hands-on involvement in the decision-making process for the development of these wax figures?
I definitely do. Elmer was the artist in the family, and when he died, then and he guided that process of working with the sculptors. Elmer, some of the sculptures in the slave ship, for example, were done by Elmer and his team, but the wax figures were done by artisans who work specifically in wax. But Elmer, the nose is wrong or whatever, and he had the artist eye. Two of the worst wax figures we have in the museum, and they're in storage, and I never want to see them again, are the figures that we developed after Elmer died. And when I was guiding the process, two of the, for me, two of the best, or some of the best figures that we have now are our Frederick Douglass and Mary McLeod Bethune and Mahalia Jackson and figures like that. I guided that process. I learned what I needed to learn and to be able to see what Elmer saw or what an artist would see. And I think I've made some of the sculptors better than they might have been. I made a decision like Frederick Douglass, because he was going to be in a scene with Sojourner Truth, was going to be seated so that you had she's standing, he would be seated. I decided I wanted the big hair on Frederick Douglass because it says agitate, 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 and shows that firebrand Frederick Douglass. Elmer and I decided that we wanted a bonnetless Sojourner Truth. I mean, all of the figures that you see of her are with that little rag on her head. I'd like to think that the Sojourner Truth didn't always, every time you saw her, have that. I mean, she was 10 years old at one time. Did she wear a rag on her head at 10 years old? So those kinds of decisions. Our most criticized figure is Martin Luther King, because Elmer and I decided that we wanted a young king. People recognized him at the end of the movement, before he was assassinated. The weight of the race and the cause and the movement was showing on his face, and so forth. He was heavier, and but he made a decision to take on all of that at around 26 years old. I can't think of it, how many 26-year-olds would want to take on the weight of a whole movement as Martin Luther King did. And we feel that sometimes we need to break the mold of perception and so forth. And therefore, I think we made the right decision. We have to kind of bring people along in accepting of Martin Luther King, that he wasn't always the "I have a dream," and that "I have a dream" wasn't his only speech, and so forth. So sometimes trying to take people outside of their perception and comfort level, and so forth.
Who determined the actual exhibits and how they flow in the museum?
That was Elmer. We were required, because we'd gotten a bond from the state through Senator Clarence Blount. We decided, we were required to hire exhibit designers, but Elmer would come in with his signature legal pad, and he had drawn whatever the scene was going to be, and they'd sit down and discuss it. And he would give them some leeway. For example, they thought that the idea of where we have the writers, that we should have actual books written by Black authors, and so they're in a library setting. But Elmer and the man going through the stove. I would have, as an English teacher, I would have just filled you with a lot of text, but Elmer made it visual. So those kinds of decisions that went into the scenes. And also, as I said earlier, looking at those wax figures that you would expect to be in a museum on African American history, and therefore scenes that complement those.
If you haven't visited already, you'll want to add the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum to places you ought to visit. The museum is located at 1601 East North Avenue in Baltimore. It is currently open to visitors Thursdays to Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sundays, noon to 5 p.m. COVID safety precautions are taken to make sure everyone stays safe. Tickets for the museum range from $12 to $15. Also consider the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum for group tours. And now we return to our program.
When you enter the museum, you come face to face with Hannibal on a mighty elephant and Bessie Coleman soaring above the museum's lobby. The museum takes each visitor on a brief journey through African American history that provides a more realistic visual account of our history. From debunking the Hollywood portrayal of ancient Africa, the Tarzan swinging in the tree, to the enlightening and horrific look at the Middle Passage, the Underground Railroad, the contributions of abolitionists, to the noble ways in which African Americans have enriched and built this country. The exhibits cover a broad array of contributions and the impact of the legacy of the rich history of African Americans. One of the most powerful exhibits is the Middle Passage one. It's an exhibit of Africans aboard a slave ship. And I must admit, the first time, because I've been to the museum several times, the first time I came in, I just stood there transfixed on that exhibit. I'm also an African American history major. And it was like everything I studied came to life in that one exhibit. What was the purpose or vision behind that particular exhibit? Because it is one of the most powerful ones I've ever seen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We had when we opened up, we had an exhibit where our somewhere near the area where our church scene and the bale of cotton and all of that. That was our Middle Passage exhibit, and it was a very the staff and I loved it. It was a very powerful exhibit, and Elmer was always complaining about it. It's not what I want, and he kept saying he wanted an exhibit where we weren't observers but participants in the experience, and he didn't want us looking into from the outside looking in. He wanted us from the inside looking in, and eventually said, I want there to be a slave ship and you're surrounded by it, and the whole notion that you go down into the slave ship, the idea that the sounds and remember sounds that follow you, or the moaning and so forth, that he wanted all of that, and he wanted you to be immersed by that, surrounded by that, having a sense of, again, those yardsticks by which we measure how far we've come and measure the appreciation that we should have for those who came before us.
And it is definitely a very powerful one. He met that vision perfectly. One exhibit that is near and dear to me is the exhibit featuring Ethel Henchman Lyle, one of the founders of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. How did this exhibit come to fruition?
Well, the figure was contributed by the Baltimore County Alumni Association. It was led by Everine Johnson Turner and her committee, and the AKAs were your sorority was told to that they asked if they could create their own scene, and because we had dimensions and so forth, we gave them the dimensions, and you AKAs don't listen, so you made it so much bigger than the mission, the dimensions we gave you, but it's a very powerful exhibit. The both Ethel Hedgeman Lyle and Nellie Quander, they're both very well done, and I'm very proud of the exhibit and the scene, and I thank you AKAs for allowing us to tell and help preserve your legacy through our wax figures.
And do you have on the horizon additional figures that you plan to add to the museum?
Yes, we do. I have one because by now we would have unveiled it, but because of COVID, we haven't been able to. So I don't have permission to talk about it, but we are, and you know, we've got Kamala Harris, and we've got John Lewis, and we've got our Elijah Cummings, and someone asked me last week if I could if someone said right now, who do you want in the museum, along with those that figures people that I just named, and Stacey Abrams and so forth. I would say Eleanor Roosevelt and Bayard Rustin. Eleanor Roosevelt, her friendship with Mary McLeod Bethune, so much of what was accomplished, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is given credit for it. A lot of it was Eleanor. I mean, with the Tuskegee Airmen, for example, that she was willing to, that they were brought in and allowed to serve because of Eleanor Roosevelt, because she stood up for them. Marian Anderson, and the fact that she was able to sing at the Lincoln Memorial and so forth. And then Bayard Rustin, who really was the along with uh, God, his name just escaped me. It'll come back. Um, that they were the ones behind the March on Washington. They were the organizers. A. Philip Randolph, and I mean Martin Luther King, because of the "I Have a Dream" speech, got the credit, but it was Bayard Rustin, and but because he was gay, then he was pushed into the background, and his legacy, he just has never risen to the legacy that he deserves. And so just that, because he was definitely someone whose story needs to be told.
In addition to the museum exhibits, the museum is also very active in the community, providing services for children, young adults. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing with the community?
Well, one of the things I'm proudest of is what we do with youth. I've never wanted them to have the standard experience. So for a decade or more, we've been doing our docent training program with Youth Works. We train kids to become tour guides. They like the word docent; it sounds fancier, but they so they come in saying this is just like school, some of them, and and I'm not sure how they think, what they think they could learn about the history without studying it, but they leave with an appreciation. They, some of them apologize to me, this is not like school, because they're not teaching us this in school. So it's that something that's different, but that they can take away with them. We trained them this year and last year to do a motor coach tour, because tourism is such a driver of economies across this nation. I want them to learn the inside of tourism so that they can become an entrepreneur with a tour company, not always just being the part on the service side of that, but being the ones who create the businesses and hire other people to serve, because again, it is the driver of economy across this nation. And our kids do an amazing job. This year they had to do a virtual tour, and so they look as if they were on the bus and going on to Druid Hill Avenue to talk about Miss Chutzell and Hawkins, because the theme is suffrage to suppression, the Black woman's battle for the vote. As in 2020, we observed the passage of the 19th Amendment and so forth. But they're telling you that history, and they do an amazing job. So those kinds of projects. We're working with Harvard Heights, and doing a number of things with the students there, in taking the museum virtually to the children, and all over the kinds of things that we get a chance to do with youth.
That's excellent. We definitely have to keep the young people involved because they are our future. Can
Yes.
you tell us, even with the COVID situation, is the museum open for people to actually visit?
The museum is open. We have protocols, the mask and social distancing and so forth. We reopened after the shutdown by the state and the city. We opened on August 28th. August 28th, very important date in history. We opened with a temporary exhibit on Emmett Till, because he was lynched, murdered August 28th, 1955. And August 28th was then selected as the date for the March on Washington, August 28th, 1963. So we did an exhibit on both of those, on the Emmett Till and the significance of his death, the significance of his mother's refusing to have a closed casket funeral, the significance of the Jet magazine articles, and with the photo, the significance of his Uncle Mose testifying in court against and pointing out the man who had killed him, which is the kind of thing that could get a black man killed, but that he stood up and pointed out the figure of and pointed out the man who had killed him all of those things that mean that that's a part of our history that we know. And the March on Washington and Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph and Martin Luther King and the I Have a Dream speech and so forth.
Excellent. Are there any plans for expansion for the museum?
We work night and day on COVID-19 has put a throne, just changed course for us as we try to group. But we started in 1995 purchasing the buildings in the block. We own all of those properties now, and it is our desire to and our uh, life's mission to create a block long museum.
Excellent. Dr. Martin, it was a pleasure to have you this evening. Thank you so much. We honor you and truly appreciate everything that you and your husband did to bring the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum to fruition. It is indeed a jewel for the state. Do you have any closing words that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I'd like to thank Epsilon Omega chapter for inviting me to appear. The questions were amazing, and I thank you for allowing me to share a lot of information about Great Blacks in Wax. And thank you very much.
Unfortunately, we must bring our conversation with Dr. Martin to a close. We have tried to incorporate all of the questions that we've received in the chat. If you have additional questions or would like to reach out to Dr. Martin to get more information, please visit the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum's website. Be sure to support the museum by stopping by for a tour. As a reminder, the museum is open for business and operating with safety protocols in place. Check the website for their hours of operation. Again, thank you, Dr. Martin, for taking time to talk with us about the museum. The vision you and your husband, Dr. Elmer Martin, had for the museum has truly left its mark, not just on the city of Baltimore or the state of Maryland, but it's left its mark nationally and internationally. It's truly a place everyone should visit and experience. I would also like to thank your assistant, Ms. Carol Jolly, and your staff member, Mr. Douglas Dickerson, for all of their help with this program. I'd like to thank our president of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Upsilon Epsilon Omega chapter, Ms. Kendra Brown. I'd also like to thank Ms. Ashley Barnes of the UEO Technology Team, the UEO Public Relations Team, and members of the UEO Target 3 Committee. In addition, I'd like to thank the UEO Vice President, Ms. Nakia Showell, who will close out this evening's program. Nakia?
Good evening. My name is Dr. Nakia Showell, Vice President and Program Chairman of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Upsilon Epsilon Omega chapter. We want to thank all of you for joining us this evening as we feature a true pioneer and history maker, Dr. Joanne Martin. On behalf of the Upsilon Epsilon Omega chapter, we want to thank Dr. Martin for sharing her time and incredible expertise. We are absolutely honored to feature a leader of such vision, wisdom, creativity, and innovation. We also want to thank our lead for today's event and the leader of our Building Your Economic Legacy program target, Ms. Lauren Jones. Please join us next week as we continue to celebrate Women's History Month with the first installment of our Pretty Great Read Book Club series. Next Wednesday, March 17th at 7 p.m., we will have an exciting virtual dialogue about the novel How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House by author Cherie Jones. Further information about this event and all of our events can be found by following us on our social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or by following us on our website at www.akaupsilonemega.org. Again, thank you for joining us and have a safe and wonderful evening.
To find out more about the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum, please visit greatblacksinwax.org. Thank you for joining Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Upsilon Epsilon Omega chapter this evening. We look forward to seeing you at future events. Have a good night.